My team, they wanted me to start out with a joke about a submarine and that I'm really busy because it's waiting for me. But I wasn't certain how the tension was in Sweden when it comes to submarines and so forth right now. So I won't start with a bad pun or joke such as that. I'm just waiting for my cue. Is it okay to start whenever I want to? Splendid. Thank you. So thank you very much to the Nordic APIs Summit for inviting me here. It's always exciting to get to Stockholm, especially once it's your first time here. And I really like the cold. It feels kind of like Denmark, except a month ahead of time, but it's okay. I can probably get used to it at some point. I'd like to start out with a small story first. So in 2007, some brilliant minds at Kellogg's marketing, they decided they should contact Lego and ask of us, why don't we collaborate on some sort of clever kids snack or something like that. So they got together, the different marketing department, and they came up with this brilliant thing. It's called a Lego Fun Snacks, and it was actually wine gums in a package. I think there were 12 in each pack. There were 10 in a pack, such as this one. And they had what we call clutch power, which actually means that you could take the gummy bear and you could actually put a real-life brick on top of it. You couldn't put it at the bottom, doesn't matter. Kellogg's thought it was brilliant, and Lego at that time was spread all over the world with all kinds of different things that we were developing and doing. So it made sense to us as well to go into the candy industry along with one of the world's biggest cereal producer. Unfortunately, it didn't take very long for our consumers to say, so now I've spent 3 years teaching my child that he or she shouldn't put bricks in their mouths. And now suddenly, you are making them taste like strawberry and orange and what have you kinds of fruit. So the product was pretty soon withdrawn from shelves in different stores as well. And this is probably the first and only time, unless you go to Google, you'll ever see this image and a Lego guy in front of it again. So keep this in mind. And I want you to remember this story because it's going to be important later on. So my name is Bjørn Petersen. I'm a platform architect at Lego, and a platform architect is basically sort of an architect that works on platforms. So I work in our platform department, but I'm not a tech guy. I'm probably more of a business guy. I've got a great team that knows a lot about the technical stuff, and then I just make sure that we got the business behind us once we go ahead and do this. My primary responsibility is a thing called Lego ID, which I'll get into pretty soon. If you have any questions, I've actually done a bit of a controversial thing, but there will actually be a couple of minutes time before I conclude this speech. But you're also welcome to send me an email or to contact me on Twitter or any of the other social profiles. I'm sure you can find me. Now, in order to ensure that you're all completely aware of what I'm going to talk to, because once I start talking, things are going to go fast. Not as fast as our ongoing trip in the API space, but it's important that you've got some basic knowledge before we go into this. So just to give you a brief overlook of, so how do we collect data? So these are some examples of how we collect data at Lego. So our primary portal is obviously lego.com, where both children and adults, they go and they can shop and they can write on our message board and they can upload images and they can do all sorts of stuff. It's basically our marketing portal, and that's where we get in contact with most of our consumers. Then, as I mentioned, we've got Lego ID, and we've got something called Lego Club, which is basically a fan club for children under 13. And if you didn't know, children are our primary target group. I'm pretty sure that some of you in here feel that you are a target group as well. And I agree with you because you are too. I'm in there as well. But children under 13 are obviously our primary target group, and those are our products that are targeted towards them. So we've got a great fan club. We've also got a loyalty program and so forth. Doesn't matter right now. We've got apps, a lot of apps, both with our names on them that are developed by us, and apps with our name on it, but are developed by different companies. I'll get back to that. And then obviously we've got analytics and all kinds of other stuff there too. So for us, we've spent some 80 years now putting trust into what we do. And for us, it's really, really important that people, they actually trust what we are doing. Because as I started out saying, if suddenly we make things that children can put into their mouths and choke on, we're actually going to get into trouble, and people will really quickly lose trust in what we do. So it's crucial that whatever we run into, people can trust it. And we've got several ways of putting trust into things. So one of the ways, if you look at Lego.com, is that we follow the American COPPA 2.0 regulation. It sounds very exciting, and it is. I can promise you that. If anybody is interested in knowing what COPPA 2.0 is all about, I'll love to tell you afterwards, but it stands for Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, and it basically means that we can't do anything unless we've got consent from parents. So the moment that we start collecting some data from children, we need to have parental consent. I'll get back to that. We try to make our legal documents as readable as possible, which means that you don't have to work with nuclear fission. You don't need to have a degree in law or anything else like that. So if you're accepting any of our terms and service, if you're doing any of those kind, we need people like us and everybody else to read them and say, this is okay, I can understand. Lego is not going to give my data away. Lego is not going to do that with my data. We want to make sure that it's like that. Then we work together with different third-party vendors, and they go through all our experiences, especially Lego.com, and they put them in what's called safe harbor, which means they've gone through our site and say, yes, they are compliant with most regulations and law requirements, and if they're not, we'll pay the fine, which is okay with us. It's okay with us. We're not interested in money all the time. But it's actually more about the distrust and the damage to our brand that were our primary concern. And then obviously, because we're dealing with children, everything that is put on our website or everything that is connected with Lego needs to be moderated. There is this factor in the moderation sphere that is called the TTP factor. It is a completely viable term. It's called time to penis. And it actually means that from the instant that you're able to upload anything to a website, it won't take too long before you can find images there that you don't want your brand to be affiliated with. So it might be one thing, or it might be a McDonald's logo, or it might be different kinds of things that we're not allowed to because we would step on somebody's toes or we would break some sort of copyright law and so forth. And another thing, if we're looking at Lego ID and looking at Lego Club and so forth, it's important for us that we don't connect with social media. We love to, and our marketeers would love to, because there's nothing better than people liking a product or commenting on a product and so forth. But we don't know what is actually happening with data once we connect with some of Facebook's or Google's APIs. So we actually do our own APIs when it comes to that, or we do our own endpoints. So we actually come up with a way to connect with Facebook. We might not give our consumers and our marketeers the great functionality that they're used to once you click on a like button, but that's okay because we want to be in control of whatever data we are providing to Facebook, Twitter, Google, and so forth. For us, it's a privilege to have the consumer's data, and we're actually only borrowing the data. So if we're suddenly going ahead and giving this data to Facebook just because we find it fancy to have their API or their connection modules on our website, we'd rather do our own. It might hurt us in some way, but that's okay because Facebook is not going to live off the data that our consumers are giving to us once they come to Lego.com. Now, Lego ID, it's actually fairly simple. It's actually our authentication system. That's basically it. So Lego ID is used in all the experiences that we offer. If you go in as a child, we ask you for a username, unique username, a password, your date of birth, and your parents' email address. Once they've done that, we send an email to the parents saying your child is registered. Please provide us with your country and their gender. We use that for statistical reasons and to make sure that wherever they go, so if they're going to our friends' products, it's always nice to see there are perhaps more girls there than boys. And if they go to City and Star Wars, it's the other way around. If you're over 13, you give us your username, password, email address, date of birth, gender, and country. That's it. Then you've got an account. We use it for our message board. We use it to register for our VIP program. We use it if you want to play in some of our games, in our apps, on our crowdsourcing platform. So we use Lego ID for all kinds of weird and great things, especially internal developed products. However, in 2010, I think it was a dark and stormy afternoon, maybe mid-September. Some of our brilliant design guys, they came up with a pitch for our corporate management board saying, we should do a new theme and it should have Lego minifigures in it that are shaped like animals. Okay, that's crazy. I know everybody here, I can see it on your faces, Lego animals, so that's just crazy. We actually did it back in the 80s with something called Fabuland from the Duplo series. Perhaps some of you will recognize that. But we haven't done it on this scale for quite a while. So they went ahead with that. At around the same time, we had this MMO, multiplayer online game called Lego Universe. It was launched and it was running, but it wasn't running as we were expecting it to. So it was shut down. And then the guys at the Chima product theme, they suddenly saw, perhaps there's an opportunity here to take some of the learnings that we had from Lego Universe and apply them to a different universe where they'll actually support this theme. So they said, we should definitely go ahead and create another multiplayer online game. But this time, we shouldn't develop it ourselves. We shouldn't be forced to buy a game studio because they suddenly ran out of money, like it happened with Lego Universe. So instead, we should collaborate with somebody else. So we started up a collaboration with Warner Brothers. And if you don't know Warner Brothers, it's a huge American organization with all kinds of departments and legal and a lot of different companies in there. And there's one company in there called Turbine that we collaborated with. They were the ones that were going to develop the game together with Warner Brothers in Montreal. So they started developing the game, and that was all great. But during the initial, I think it was during the contract negotiations, we also decided that we need to use Lego ID for this. We are not going to give Warner Brothers our consumers' data, so it would make sense to use Lego ID for this. So we were approached, the Lego ID team, and said, yeah, sure, we can probably do that. At that point, we just released something that we proudly called Lego ID 2.0. We like the sound of that because it sounds very Web 2.0-ish and so forth. So it makes sense to add the 2.0 at the end there. It was basically just service-enabling Lego ID. So we had a service endpoint at that point. That was all that we had. So now we had to support something developed by Warner Brothers on an external platform. Okay, so how do we go about that? So after some research and discussions back and forth, we decided that we probably need to do some sort of API contract with Warner Brothers. What do we want to share with Warner Brothers? What kind of data are we willing to give them? And it became apparent fairly quickly that in order to do this, we needed to give them some sort of information about a user. But we weren't quite sure what it was because we didn't want to give our users username and password on some Warner Brothers server that we didn't have control over. So we had to come up with a different way of solving this. At the same time, we were also initiating the talks about the user experience, but we said, we'll probably fix that once we get there. Hint, we never fixed it once we got there because at that point we were so busy doing all kinds of other API stuff that user experience, get out of here, we can always do that. So this is actually what we ended up with. This is a pretty boring slide, but it's okay because that's what it's supposed to be. So what we did, we actually put Lego ID in an IFrame and we put it on chimaonline.com, which is hosted by Warner Brothers. So what you see in the back is hosted by Warner Brothers, and what you see in the IFrame, except from the two banners, is hosted by us. We thought it was brilliant, and we had investigated different ways of doing this. But in 2012, it turns out that some browsers at that point, they didn't like third-party cookies. They still don't like third-party cookies, which is okay. And one browser specifically, it didn't like third-party cookies if you've never been to that website before. So now we were actually sort of, oh, geez, that's a lot of trouble. So what we actually did, we said, it's probably not important. So right now we're actually using this on borrowed time, because I'm pretty sure at some point all these third-party cookies and what have you, and the way that we're actually circumventing this is going to be shut down. But right now we're happy and we're just going like this, because it's probably not going to happen overnight, hopefully. And I know that a lot of you out here are thinking, why didn't they just use OAuth 2.0, or why didn't they use post-message? And you've probably got 10 other ideas of how we could have done this too. But in 2011, 12-ish, OAuth 2.0 really wasn't a viable solution. We didn't feel that, and to be honest, I'm not sure that I still feel like OAuth is something that Lego can get behind yet. We don't think that the platform is mature and that it is secure enough yet to actually start providing it. I'm not saying that we're not going to investigate it in 2015, and perhaps we should do it, but at that time, it really didn't make sense. And then post-message, yeah, we could probably use post-message in some other ways, but we had to support Internet Explorer 7. Yeah, I can see it's just, okay, I'm going to duck here, because Internet Explorer 7, it kind of limits what you actually can do once it gets to this. So we came up with a brilliant idea of just saying, why don't we just make a GUID? So we are providing Warner Brothers with a global user ID, which they connect into their own Warner Brothers ID account. So the consumer will actually never notice that they have an account someplace over at Warner Brothers, and all we do is actually authenticate the user and send over this GUID. Everybody is happy. Then there's just the communication between Warner Brothers and telling the parents that they need to register a Warner Brothers account, that they need to connect into the Warner Brothers ID that the child has created, given some weird name. It could be Fluffy Purple Cucumber or something like that. It could be their username, and you just have to take your Warner Brothers account and connect it to Fluffy Purple Cucumber, and then you have to transfer some money into their wallet so they can use it and so forth. That's Warner Brothers issues. We do not care about that. All we wanted to do was connect the child with Chima Online and with Warner Brothers. So this slide is also a must-have slide. It's a chart which basically doesn't show much, but it's important to have charts. Here it's a chart that was in the template, and I kind of liked it. So I thought, perhaps I should show you how much knowledge my team has aggregated over the years compared to something else. So what you'll see at the bottom are years, and then you'll see a scale going from 25 to 100. And that's a pretty clever way of doing it. Anyhow, we were suddenly forced to learn a lot about APIs, because working together with a huge company such as Warner Brothers and some of the other companies, it actually requires that you've got your backend and your architecture in place, and you've got everything under control. So when we started investigating this entire API thing, we could see that there are definitely benefits of going this way. Suddenly we had easier ways of integrating both internally and externally with some of our offerings. So in this instance, Lego ID, we could pretty quickly see that, why don't we go ahead and make an API for Lego ID? And then we won't just offer it to Warner Brothers, but we'll actually expand it so that we can offer it both to our internal customers and to our external customers. So we went ahead and did that, and we started doing some internal evangelism. I recently had just had a chat with Lan Kin outside, and he said internal evangelism is some of the most important thing. And I completely agree with him. But so that's what we're doing. But it's very, very, very difficult in a huge organization to start this, because if I go out there and I start evangelizing it, they will have evangelists with all kinds of different hidden agendas breathing down their necks all the time. But I'm lucky that my product, Lego ID, is such an important and crucial product for the entire Lego group that they're kind of forced to do it. That also puts a huge strain on my team in order to support all these. So we were actually suddenly spending a lot of our time documenting and helping different teams integrating with our APIs. And it actually became kind of a chore to do that. Because now we had a website with all kinds of offerings on it. So we had our internal crowdsourcing platform, which was developed or provided to us by a company called Chaotix. So one of my guys, he had to fly to London and sit with them and help them integrate Lego ID there. Then we've got our message board, which we set up a couple of years ago together with a community platform from a company called Lithium. And we did that on our old service endpoint, and now it turns out that was definitely not the way to go. So now we are left with a huge task of actually converting this old, ancient and obsolete way of integrating with the Lithium platform and somehow upgrade it to our preferred Lego ID API. No problem, we'll do that. Then we've got mobile apps. Suddenly with the increase of our API and the ease of actually integrating with Lego ID, the increase of Lego ID in mobile apps and in different other apps, it became pretty apparent. So suddenly everybody, they wanted to integrate with Lego ID because it gave a consumer a benefit of having an account, and thus you could sync your progress, and perhaps you could upload something directly to our message board and to our galleries and so forth. So there was great business value in integrating directly into Lego ID. So how do you take something that is web-enabled and then you suddenly give it to somebody who knows a lot about developing in Unity or in C++ or C# or Swift or whatever all these iOS and Android and so forth platforms are called? Because they are great at developing games. But to be honest, they know very, very little about web development. So we could give them this wrapper that we've put in Lego ID in, a Unity wrapper, an iOS wrapper, an Android wrapper, and so forth. We can give them to that. And it would just look hideous. It would look horrible once they had it in there, because they would say, okay, so I'm going to size the window and I'll put it in here and it'll look like this and so forth. So right now, one of our biggest concerns is actually which layer should Lego ID or should we exist on? Should we go ahead and give them some sort of native layer where or native apps where we'll just put them on, or what should we do? Then we've got some top secret projects. I just put them in there to kind of tease you, but keep an eye out in 2015, because you'll see our APIs are used in ways that we didn't anticipate it would be used in this year or the previous year. So, just a quick rundown now why you won't see a public Lego API. So it doesn't matter if it's a Lego ID API or any other API. Why don't we have a public API? Well, actually, we aren't ready for it. As you can probably hear from my talk so far, we don't feel that we can provide anybody with a public API yet. For instance, we want people to trust our brand, so we can't have our name or our API on sites where we don't feel comfortable yet. So it's all about brand protection, and it's all about keeping trust with our consumers. And lastly, it's about readiness and ensuring that we've got the API management and the platform there. Okay, questions? We'll just skip those, and I'll just show you my 3 takeaways, and then we're good to go. There you go. So, can I just do them? Thanks, Travis. So the 3 takeaways is, put trust into your APIs, ensure that you've got the consumer's confidence and trust into whatever you do. Remember, Lego won't do a public API for quite some time. We simply aren't ready, so you won't be able to access our brick database and our models and so forth. And plan ahead. We thought we had a strategy. We are having a strategy, but we didn't expect our APIs to be such a huge success in such a short time. So right now we're doing most of our things manually. We've got no API management tool or any thoughts of that. We are looking into ways of doing it, but we were actually fairly surprised that it took off so quickly. So ensure that once your business starts to grow, your API will definitely grow with you very, very fast. Yeah, that was it.
All right. Really, really good advice. Really great talk, Dennis. Thank you for that. I definitely have seen many people starting in the same place of, identity, figuring out who someone is that they're talking to, for establishing that trust. So good advice. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Kin Lane. Kin Lane's going to be talking to us about sort of the global trend of platformification. This isn't just something that we're seeing in the Nordics. This is something that's happening all around the world. And so to give us that global perspective, I'd like to welcome Kin Lane to the stage. And just while Kin is setting that up, I wanted to also, Dennis, give you this keynote speaker present. Thank you for making your way up from Denmark. Kin, you all sorted there, mostly?
Almost.
Okay.
Where's my cable?
So Kin was here yesterday giving a workshop, and the moment it was over, he he said,